Don't let him past the tent. She didn't bother to lower her voice. He'll embarrass himself enough on his own. Charlotte snorted in her champagne. I bet he's still driving that ancient Corolla, if it even started this morning. I stood at the edge of the gravel drive and watched the sunset turn the hood of the Lamborghini gold. I'd parked it right near the entrance. Neither of them noticed. I let them talk. No reason to correct them. In 4 hours, everyone laughing beneath that white tent would be glued to their phones, not for wedding photos, for a company announcement. My name would be at the top, Morgan's would be under it, and next to it, terminated. 3 years ago, Dena told me I'd never be enough for a woman like her. Tonight, the man she thought was stuck in a beat-up Corolla was about to become the person her husband answered to. But for any of this to make sense, you have to go back with me 3 years to a cramped apartment above a laundromat. That place always smelled like fabric softener and rusted pipes. Tuesday nights were loud. The dryers shook the floor beneath my mattress. I was 26, owned one suit. Dena hated that suit. She never said so directly. She was more careful back then, but I could tell every time she smoothed the lapel before we walked into a restaurant, like she was apologizing for me, just in case. 3 years ago, on a Thursday night, she sat across from me at a restaurant I couldn't pay for and said she needed someone going somewhere. I remember every word. "You're brilliant, Daniel, but brilliance doesn't pay for a life. I need a life." She didn't cry. I did later, alone on the fire escape, the dryers thudding below like a pulse that wouldn't quit. I didn't hate her for it then. Not then. I hated how right she sounded. So I did what I've always done with heartbreak. I lit a fire under myself, sold my car, maxed out my cards, bought a business license and a laptop that overheated if I opened too many tabs. I worked nights, built during the day. Nobody saw it happen. Nobody cared. Nobody clapped. That's the quiet part nobody talks about. Success grows in empty rooms and late hours, on mattresses still tinged with someone else's laundry. 3 years. That's how long it took for Daniel James to mean something in rooms where no one cared where I'd come from. Dena never knew. She unfollowed me the week after she left. I only heard from a mutual friend who found it hilarious. Then, after 3 years of silence, an envelope arrived. Cream cardstock, gold foil. My name spelled right, somehow more like a jab than a courtesy. Dena Matheny requests the honor of your presence. Tucked into it was her handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. Hope you can make it. Feel free to borrow a suit if you need to. No judgment. XOD. I stared at those words for ages. 3 years of nothing, and that's how she chose to reach me. Not a call, not an apology, a knife, but elegant. She wanted me to flinch. She expected me to hide. She still pictured me as that 26-year-old left behind. She was wrong. I turned the invitation over in my hands and started laughing because it was perfect. She'd just given me something I hadn't had in years, an audience. I picked up my phone and texted 4 words. Clear my calendar. Saturday. Then I stepped into my real closet, not the old one, the one now floor to ceiling with tailored suits and shoes I used to admire behind glass. At the very end hung a charcoal suit I'd never worn. I guess I'd been saving it just for this. And so, the night I became the punchline at Dena's sister's party started.
Turns out, building something from nothing isn't a montage, it's a folding table, still boxed because you don't have time to set it up. I worked on my knees for months. The laptop overheated with more than 2 windows open, so I learned to work differently. One problem solved, then the next. That discipline saved me. I just didn't know it yet. My first client was a dry cleaner nearby, $300 for a website with online scheduling. I remember doing the math, 11 days of groceries, 6 weeks of parking, 1 month closer to not hearing the landlord's heavy steps and wondering if eviction was next. I took every job I could. Built spreadsheets for a used forklift guy, inventory software for a pharmacy still clinging to carbon paper. Nothing glamorous, all practice.
And while I stared at code at 2 a.m., coffee cold beside me, Dena was 3 miles away, learning a different world. Which fork to use, which names opened doors, which men to mock, which to charm. I learned about her new life piece by piece. A hedge fund associate, a dealership owner, then Morgan. Each one seemed like another rung on her ladder. I didn't follow her because I was bitter. Some small wound in me just needed proof that burying myself in work had been worth it. But then things shifted. By year 2, the forklift dealer introduced me to a logistics company. That brought me to a warehouse operation hemorrhaging money through bad systems. I fixed it, and when they tried to pay me, I asked for something else, equity. They laughed at first, then they looked at what I'd built, and they agreed. 2%, then 5% somewhere else. Small but growing bits of ownership in desperate companies that couldn't afford my price, but were willing to give me a slice of their future. Nobody ever taught me this. A paycheck pays for your time. Ownership pays for what your time creates. So I quit renting my future, started buying little pieces of other people's. Quietly, patiently. Nobody knew, so nobody saw how fast it all grew. By year 3, those fractions became something bigger. Lawyers took care of paperwork, accountants did the sums. My name rarely appeared where people expected it, on purpose. Anonymity wasn't a weakness, it was armor. Meanwhile, Dena proosted engagement pics, 6-carat ring, designer dress, rooftop champagne. Morgan beamed like he'd won something.
I never commented, never liked a thing, just kept working. Because by then, my goal had shifted. I didn't need to prove her wrong anymore. I wanted to become someone impossible to overlook. And somewhere along the way, I got there. New apartment, a driver, a garage holding a car Dena would have thought belonged to someone else, and a company whose real owner no one could count on one hand. One secret stayed mine. Morgan had no idea I was tied to his company. Not yet. Neither did Dena. So when the wedding invite showed up, I didn't see an invitation. I saw an opening. Because the man Dena thought she left behind was about to walk into her wedding carrying a secret worth more than any wedding ring. The rehearsal dinner was at a place too fancy to print prices on the menu. I wasn't there, but months later, a bridesmaid named Priya told me almost every detail over coffee. She described Dena tapping her wine glass. "So, about tomorrow." Charlotte leaned in. "Is he coming? I still can't believe you invited him." "He's coming," Dena said, smiling. "I know Daniel. He'd rather choke on pride than admit he can't handle seeing me happy." Morgan laughed into his scotch, the kind of laugh that needs someone watching. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "Seat him by the bathroom?"
Better. Dena pulled out her phone and the table went quiet. They all started grinning when she showed the seating chart. Table 14, back by the kitchen doors, out of sight, out of mind, next to a cheap centerpiece specifically chosen, according to Dena, as wouldn't clash with him. He'll get the message, Dena said, loud and clear. David Owens, Morgan's groomsman and golden boy, swirled his drink. Want me to say something to him at the reception? I've been looking for some new material. Don't waste it, Dena said, pausing. He's not worth a real joke. She smiled. Just let him watch. Priya said the table went quiet again. Let him sit there and watch me marry someone real.
Charlotte was already on her phone. A moment later she looked up, found his LinkedIn, not updated in 3 years. She twisted the screen. Freelance consultant. God, she said, some people never figure it out. Be nice, Dena told her. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. You invited him here to humiliate him. I'm giving him perspective, Dena replied, lifting her glass. Morgan raised his too. The table followed. To tomorrow, to the wedding, to a future they thought belonged to them. And quietly to the poor ex, to table 14, to showing Daniel where he belonged. David snapped a photo of the chart. Priya said he was already planning an Instagram joke about old flames who couldn't keep up. No one asked what I'd actually been doing the past 3 years. They didn't need to. In their story, the ending was set. Poor men stayed poor. Rejection is forever. A scholarship kid from East Baltimore doesn't get a do-over. So they laughed, planned, toasted, never knowing that across town, people they'd never meet were prepping something that would make table 14 look insignificant. Priya told me later she felt uneasy watching Dena's face as she relished planning my humiliation. It was like they were cheering for something dangerous they couldn't name. She was right. The ceremony ended at 4:47 p.m. I remember. I watched from the tree line, just far enough away, beside a car the color of a warning sign. Let them have their vows, their kiss, their applause, hell, even the overpriced white doves. I wanted the only moment that really mattered. Cocktail hour started at 5:30, a string quartet tuned under a tent draped in orchids. Servers drifted through a crowd of people who never needed to check a price before ordering dinner. By the kitchen doors sat table 14, empty, waiting, right where Dena thought her poor ex belonged. At 6:04, I turned the engine. There's a certain noise that cuts through a party. This was it. Not just loud, sharp like a gunshot in a quiet forest. Every conversation stopped, heads swiveled toward the drive.
Charlotte saw me first. Her champagne glass paused mid-air. I eased in slowly. Sunlight bounced off the Lamborghini. Doors lifted up. Somewhere near the bar, someone gasped. Another whispered, "Is that an Aventador?" I stepped out in the charcoal suit, platinum watch catching the same golden light. I took my time. 3 years had taught me you never rush when you're not the one trying to prove something. David Owens saw me next. His phone dropped a few inches. Morgan turned last, confusion on his face, searching for my story in the version Dena's told. Dena was mid-laugh. The sound died in her throat when her eyes caught the car, then me. Her glass shifted. Champagne trickled over her knuckles. She didn't even notice. She was trying to find some old ghost in me. The guy who apologized for existing, who'd have slinked to table 14 and thanked her. He didn't show up. "You look surprised," I said. She faltered. I looked past her, to David. His phone dropped a few inches. Morgan turned last, confusion on his face, searching for my story in the version Dena's told. "Don't worry," I said. I didn't expect a warm welcome either. I walked past her and the infamous table 14 like it was invisible, just kept walking to the bar. Behind me, nobody laughed, nobody whispered about the poor ex, nobody cared about the seating chart anymore, because I had arrived, and I hadn't even explained why I was there. Dinner started at 7:15. All through the meal, Morgan watched me from the head table, jaw locked, like a man replaying a joke and realizing too late it isn't as funny as he thought. I kept my attention on the woman beside me, a wedding planner's assistant, polite enough to ask real questions instead of staring. By 8:40, champagne had loosened the room. Laughter, open collars, the warmth of people who've never worried about the cost of mistakes. That's when Morgan stood and tapped his glass, the fork's ring snapping everyone's focus to him. His voice oiled into speech, thanking the staff, Dena's parents, tossing out a joke about cold feet.
Then he looked at me. "You know," he said, suddenly casual, "there was quite the entrance tonight." Guests chuckled, unsure where this was going. He grinned. "I mean, an Aventador. Rental places have really outdone themselves this year. You can get the whole package, car, suit, watch. Very convincing." Charlotte laughed a little too loudly. David raised his glass with a smug smirk. I didn't move. Let the room soak it in. Let the silence stretch unnaturally long. People's amusement began to fray, like they weren't sure if a joke was coming or a knife. "I actually respect the effort," Morgan continued, braver now. "Takes guts to show up at your ex's wedding dressed up like that. Really, it's kind of sweet." More laughter, uglier this time. But Dena wasn't part of it. I noticed her first, face down, jaw clenched, her hands trembling. She already felt the shift in the room. "To the happy couple," Morgan finished, raising his glass, "and to everyone who came a long way tonight, some further than others." Another laugh, a little forced. Some guests looked toward table 14 before remembering, awkwardly, that it was empty. I set down my fork and stood, calm and steady, how I'd learned to stand in boardrooms full of men looking to see if I'd blink. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying, "since we're setting records straight, the car isn't rented." Morgan's grin twitched, but he held it. "Suit's not rented either, neither is the watch." "Sure," Morgan forced a laugh, glancing at David. "Whatever you say, man."
"I normally wouldn't correct someone at their own wedding," I said, "but you brought this up in front of 200 people, so I figure they deserve the truth." Now the tent wasn't quiet with anticipation of a punchline, but with that electric, uneasy silence that means something real is about to happen. David's phone buzzed just once, then again and again. That's when I saw his brave face break. "You should check your phone, Morgan," I said, just sipping water, before finishing that toast. David's face changed first, his phone buzzing non-stop, an incoming call flashing a name that made his hand shake hard. He pushed back his chair so fast it nearly fell, pressing the phone to his ear, hand smothering his forehead. Even from across the tent, I heard the panic in the other voice, hurried, tense, a tone nobody wants to deliver. Wait, say that again, David blurted. The tense hush turned raw. Everyone senses something real, but they haven't worked out what or how bad. Morgan was standing, glass raised, fake smile freezing. That's not possible, David said, louder. The legal would have... He froze, looked at Morgan. Morgan, he said, voice cracking. The firm, Ashford, Klein, it's gone. What do you mean, gone? Morgan laughed, a raw, empty sound, trying desperately to steer everything back to safety. I mean, someone just bought controlling interest in the parent company, 51%. It went down an hour ago. We don't... He paused, swallowing. We don't work for Ashford Klein anymore. We work for whoever just bought it. Morgan's glass barely touched the table. He shook his head. That's insane. Nobody's been circling us. There's been no... David didn't look up. He glared at his phone like it had slapped him. It was a private deal, went through a holding company. Nobody saw it because we weren't supposed to see it. Dena's hand froze on the table, her grip biting the stem of her glass. Me? I didn't move. No need. Who? Said Morgan. His earlier bravado had drained away, leaving just the question. Who bought us? Now David finally looked up. This time he looked right at me. Not the car, not the suit. Me. The filing, he said, weighing every syllable, lists the majority shareholder as Johnson Meridian Holdings.
Silence. Not polite silence, the kind that rings in your ears and makes the oxygen feel heavy. Someone in the back whispered Johnson Meridian, like it was a spell, like the news itself was wearing a tux and cutting the cake. Morgan's eyes crawled to me, slow and terrified. I watched the last 3 years carve themselves across his face, confusion, calculation, then dread, all in a straight line. "That's not," he faltered, "that's not you." I set my glass down, reached into my jacket for the card I'd carried all night, that thin paper trump card I never planned to lay out early. But this was the moment. Daniel Johnson, my voice carried, louder than before. Nobody pretended to play music now. Johnson Meridian, founder and majority shareholder, Johnson Meridian Holdings. Morgan turned bone white under all the tailoring money could buy. "As of about an hour ago," I said, "you worked for me." Nobody snapped a photo. Nobody laughed. 200 people just sat there, bracing themselves, waiting to see what the poor X, the punchline, the forgettable, the guy no one bothered to Google, was about to do with the empire he'd been hiding in plain sight. I glanced at Dena. She dropped her champagne, glass shattered, echoing, final. The kind of sound you can't pretend never happened. I didn't stick around for the aftermath. No one who understands power needs to sit and watch the building once it's already come down. I walked out, past the dead string quartet, servers rooted in place, a wedding planner on her phone, probably Googling how to undetonate an event.
The gravel sounded the same under my feet as it had 4 hours ago, but something felt lighter, like I'd finally put down a backpack nobody else knew I was carrying since that fire escape 3 years back. I heard her first. "Daniel, Daniel, wait!" Dena's heels weren't built for loose stones. She stumbled, her dress bunched in one hand, makeup smudged under her eyes. I stopped at the car, not for her, for the door, old habits.
Please, she gasped, a step behind now. Can we just talk? A minute? You had 3 years to talk, I said, not looking at her. You picked a seating chart next to the kitchen. Priya showed me. She paled in the porch light. I didn't mean... You meant every bit of it. You planned for weeks, told Charlotte I'd get the message. You were right. She flinched like I'd shouted, but my voice hadn't changed. I made a mistake, she choked, actual tears this time. Leaving you 3 years ago, worst mistake of my life. I know that now. I see what you became, what I could have had if you just what? Waited for the bank balance to catch up, skipped the broke part? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, I said. You didn't stop loving me, Dena. You stopped loving what I could afford. There's a difference. It took me a long time to see that. In the tent behind her, Morgan was already on the phone, face ghostly, probably talking severance packages and Monday mornings that weren't coming. He doesn't even love me, Dena whispered, barely audible. He loves what I am, the photos, the name. I don't think anyone's loved me for just... She cut herself off. For just being you, I finished. She nodded, and just for a second I saw her unguarded, like the girl who used to fall asleep in the apartment above the laundromat before ambition rewrote what she thought she deserved.
I almost felt something. Almost. I don't hate you, Dena, I said, and it was true. If anything, I owe you something. Want to hear it? She searched my face, hope flickering like it always did, a little too soon. You taught me something, I said. Love that's pinned to a bank statement isn't love, it's just an investment, and investments only stick around while they're paying out. Dena, I hope Morgan makes his severance last, I said, stepping inside the car. I hear unemployment doesn't allow a +1. She reached for the door. Wait, please, is there any version of this where... No. Simple. No anger, no pride, just the answer. I started the engine. The sound drowned out whatever she tried to say next as gravel sprayed gold under the porch lights. The tent glowed behind her, a lantern above a story that ended for everyone inside but me. I didn't bother with the rear view, didn't need to watch her disappear. I'd left that laundromat apartment and everything that came with it 3 years ago. Right now, for the last time, the only thing in the mirror behind me was empty space.